Captain's Log, Day 2. We arose early at the San Luis Reservoir State Park and had a good first camping experience. Not too hot, just the good California desert dryness. We did have burn bans in effect, so we weren't able to cook because I only use open flame. But I was able to bake a bunch of vegan, delicious goodies and snacks for the road, and so that sustained me through the day and into the morning. From the reservoir, we headed south on the I-5 and then east towards Bakersfield until we found a really great place to stop for lunch. Hey y'all, we are taking a little lunch break in the beautiful California hill country, and we just so happened to find one of my relatives, actually. Yeah, his national monument is right here. Cesar Chavez. Obviously, we are not actually related, but I still have a lot of heart for him because of our mutual last names. So, very excited. This is really beautiful. There's a lot of, Spanish, and I would say New Mexican, but there's a lot of Spanish colonial feel to it, which is cool. We will see what we see. Hey y'all. We are coming out of the Cesar Chavez National Monument, which we learned some things. One is that Bear really loves reenactments, and he really wanted to go into Cesar's room. It probably smelled very good in there. There was like sandbags and hay and stuff in there. But so one of the things we learned is that this was commissioned and approved by Obama. So it's a relatively new national monument, national park, which of course means that Mr. Trump might, it's in not the best shape because of the current administration and the person in charge who really hates everything that a black man did as president. But it's just really stunningly beautiful, so I just wanted to pause here for a second and I just really love, this is their burial spot, Cesar's wife, and it's just very Spanish, it's very Mexican, and it's really beautiful. I love the trees, I love the roses, the old doors, the cacti, the suckies. It's great. Yeah, this is my home. Hey y'all, it's Sam, and we are back in the future to provide a little bit more context. And after this week, I definitely wish I could go back to Nuestra Señora Reina de la Paz, because that was a wonderful place to be, just sitting by the water fountain and enjoying the California sun. As you can imagine, if you're watching this in October 2025, the Cesar Chavez Monument is currently closed because of the U.S. government shutdown. And a lot of that has to do with the authoritarian power grab from Trump and the Republicans. There is an intentional strategy to hide our history by closing down the monuments that speak to any marginalized group or figure who has done any type of progressive change in this country. And there's also an intentional strategy to resegregate the economy. I talked about this back in March at the beginning of Trump's reign. But now that we're in this new phase of the government shutdown, they are intentionally firing certain types of workers. And when you look into it, you can very much see that they are firing Black women, they are firing Latinas, they are firing anyone that is marginalized so that they can defund us. They can make sure that we have no options other than to go into the way, the work and the labor that they want for us. And that's really important because it brings us back to Cesar Chavez, because obviously he is a labor rights organizer, he is a farm workers organizer, he cares about the people. So I think Cesar Chavez is a good person for us to remember these days, especially when this gets released on Indigenous Peoples Day, because we talk about immigrants and we are dehumanizing people in this country. ICE is attacking and violently suppressing and deporting Latinos. And at the end of the day, we have to ask, who are Latinos? And we're going to get into that over the course of this trip. But I, as a Latino who born and raised in the United States, my family born and raised in the United States, I never really knew how to define myself because I was never born in Mexico. I was never in Mexico, except for when New Mexico and Texas was Mexico and Spanish territory. And so I always had this joke when I was younger that, like, I didn't cross the border crossed me. And that is a very common joke for Latinos who were born and their ancestry is in the United States. But it was definitely a way for me to protect myself from a white community that didn't really understand me, didn't know what to do with me, because I looked white, but I didn't behave white. And Cesar Chavez is someone that we can look to in this moment when our people are being dehumanized, and we can see the humanity in all of us. And so, to quote Cesar Chavez, "La lucha nunca es sobre de las uvas o lechuga. Siempre es sobre personas." The fight is never about grapes or lettuce. It is always about people. That's it, right? People. Who do we define as people in 2025? It's a smaller and smaller number. And when I look at Cesar Chavez's life and the story of his family, I see the American story, but I see the story that we don't tell. The deeper layer of who gets to achieve the American dream, where those people come from, when their ancestors arrived, and where their ancestors arrived. Because Cesar Chavez was born in 1927 in Yuma, Arizona, to Mexican-American immigrants. And let's think about that for a second. They were born in a part of former Spanish territory, now Mexican territory, and they wanted to move to another part of what used to be Mexican territory, but is now U.S. territory. Not too far away either, Mexico to Arizona. So they migrate to Arizona. Their family loses their farm during the Great Depression, like many families. Many Black families, Latino families, and white families were destitute in the Great Depression, barely surviving, barely getting enough food for their families, barely had anything else, materials. And they did what any humans would do in a desperate situation. They knew they could not survive where they were, so they migrated. They moved. They moved to California. Just like so many other migrant laborers streaming into California, they came and they found work. They found farm work. And it was hard, and it was underpaid, and they slept in shacks on sacks of hay, which was particularly really hard to see in the museum. Because we look at these museums and it's so helpful to have our history, to be able to tell that story. And it's so important that we tell the story. And we have to stop glorifying some of these stories, because this is a man who lived in a tiny shack not that long ago. And it's not that dissimilar to how farm workers are living now. So what is the purpose of museums? Why are we telling these stories? To me, it is about how we change. It's about what we learn from the past so that we can build a better future for all of us, so that we can see each other. And I see myself in Cesar Chavez. I see my family story as well. Except my family was never in Mexico when it was Mexico. We were always in New Mexico. And so when we talk about the definition of Latinos and Hispanics, I often get defined out of that definition. And I often had a very hard time trying to figure out who I was. I was definitely white. My mom is white. But on my dad's side, there is a lot of darker skinned folks, indigenous looking folks, people with Mexican customs, Spanish customs, indigenous customs, Southwestern customs. And it was confusing to me because we don't have a definition for that. We don't have definitions because our borders change and because people migrate. And because, you know, these poor families in the Great Depression, those poor white families, they can move and migrate and their story remains intact. But if Latinos migrate and they cross the wrong border, then they become immigrants and they become illegal. And we dehumanize them and we see them as nothing. We see these men and women and children who are trying to find a good place for their families to thrive. We see them as not human when that is the exact act of being human. And that's the point. Because you can't do what ICE is doing without dehumanizing. You can't do what Israel is doing to the Palestinian people without dehumanizing. You can't do what the oil industry is funding and attacking and disappearing trans people without dehumanizing. And all of that comes through stories. Because we are inherently connected. We inherently want community and love. And the only way that we can remain disconnected is to tell those stories that dehumanize, to define us out of existence, to make sure that the stories obscure our truths and what that means for us as people. So, I think that's all I have today. I hope that you enjoy your Indigenous Peoples Day. We are going to talk a lot about Indigenous history across this trip, and I'm really excited to dig in. We're going to talk to a lot of different Latino and Indigenous organizers as well. We might have a guest on Friday, so fingers crossed for that. We're going to get a little bit more into Cesar Chavez's organizing, what that means for us now, a little bit of actions and strategy. But for now, I want to kick it back to old Sam in the past, where I am really reflecting on going through the history of Cesar Chavez and what that meant for me, what that meant for my definition of me and my humanity, because I can see myself in Cesar Chavez, and that allows me to feel more human and to feel more connective with all of the folks. So free subscribers, you will get a little bit of that conversation, and Seedling, you'll get the entire reflection. And stay to the end for a little bit of a fun nature fact. So going through the monument was actually pretty emotional, because I learned things that I didn't know about Cesar, and I've always joked about like, oh, my uncle, and then my real joke was that Hugo Chavez was my grandfather, and so many people believed me. It is so wild what you can say to people. especially when it comes to like marginalized identities. People will believe anything that you tell them about cultures that they don't understand, nor if they want to like really get to know. But yeah, so I joke about that, but like I don't think that we are related, but like it's actually not out of the question, because it looks like his family, well, one, he's my grandfather's age. So Cesar and Carlos Charlie Chavez, you know, they could have been friends. They could have been in the war together. They weren't because they weren't in the same part. All right. I'm settled on a bench and Bear is in the grass. I'm sitting at the Cesar Chavez National Monument, which is also the gravesite of Cesar and his wife. And it's really beautiful. It's very Spanish, very like California, colonial. There's definitely like the California tinge to it, but just anywhere in what used to be Mexico is just, there's so much there. There's so much connection, and I didn't really realize that until recently, that I've only ever lived in Mexico. I've only ever lived in what is now the United States, but used to be Mexico, and before that it used to be Spanish colony. And I just think that's really interesting. I think it's my home. I think the desert is my home. The Southwest is my ancestral home. And California is a part of that, all the way up to San Francisco, which feels weird.